Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of precision. It feels like engineering almost.
It's very binary.
Exactly. Like you fall, you break your arm, the x-ray goes up on the light board, and it shows that jagged white line. The doctor just points at it and says, there it is. That's the problem.
Broken or not broken.
Right. It's a clean, visible, and, oddly comforting process, even when it hurts. Because we love things to be categorized and visible. But then you step into the realm of human psychology, into the world of ideological infection and the sickness of an entire society, and suddenly that x-ray machine is completely useless.
Oh, entirely. It's the absolute definition of muddy waters.
Yeah, we're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is just totally murky.
Because, how do you take an x-ray of a sick idea? How do you image a society that is slowly, imperceptibly losing its mind?
You really can't.
No, you can't put a philosophy into an MRI machine to see where the tumors are growing. You have to look at the symptoms, the behaviors, the art, the violence, the shifting moral tectonic plates beneath the surface of the culture.
And today we are embarking on this massive, deeply philosophical exploration of what might actually be the ultimate diagnostic manual for a sick society.
It really is.
We are diving into Fyodor Dostoevsky's monumental 1872 novel, Demons. It's also sometimes translated as The Possessed or The Devils, depending on your edition.
Right, all very fitting titles.
Definitely. And the mission of this deep dive for you today is to extract the core philosophical and psychological warnings from the novel. We want to understand how ideas, when they're totally untethered from a moral anchor, can literally possess a society.
And to really grasp the gravity of this text, we have to establish the chilling real-world backdrop first. Dostoevsky didn't just invent a spooky political thriller out of thin air.
He didn't. This was based on real headlines.
Exactly. He wrote this in response to a very real, very bloody event that shook Russia to its core in 1869. He was reacting to the murder of a Russian student named Ivanov.
And this was by a radical revolutionary named Sergei Nechayev, right?
Well,
and his secret cell.
Yes. And Nechayev was not just some political dissident with a pamphlet. He was a pure fanatic. He authored this terrifying document called The Catechism of a Revolutionary.
Just the title sounds intense.
It's horrifying. In it, he preached that the revolutionary is a doomed man with no interests, no attachments, no property, and no name.
Wow. So totally stripped of humanity.
Completely. He argued that absolutely any means, murder, theft, blackmail, betrayal were completely justified for the sake of the revolution.
It's the ultimate, the ends justify the means argument pushed to its absolute horrifying limit. And Nechayev wasn't just talking a big game either.
No, he applied it.
Right. When Ivanov, who was a member of his own secret cell, started to question his methods and his, absolute authority, Nechayev didn't just excommunicate him.
That would be too simple.
Yeah, he convinced the rest of the cell that Ivanov was a police informant. They lured him to a grotto in a park, murdered him, and threw his body into a frozen pond.
A student murdered by his own peers over an ideological disagreement.
It's chilling. And when Dostoevsky saw this happening in the news, it just completely radicalized his own writing process.
He really did. He was living abroad at the time, struggling with debt, dealing with his epilepsy. But he saw this murder as the ultimate symptom of a disease he had been tracking for years.
He realized that the intellectual parlor games of his time were finally manifesting as literal corpses in frozen ponds.
Yes. He abandoned the novel he was working on at the time and just threw himself into writing Demons. He told a friend that he wanted to, quote, say everything, even if it turned out to be a mere pamphlet.
He just wanted to expose the total destruction that these new radical ideologies were bringing to Russia.
And the way he structured this exposure is brilliant, because he avoids the typical trap of the standard detective story.
Right, there's no single clear protagonist.
Exactly. He doesn't give us a hero we follow from page 1 who solves the crime. Instead, he drops us into a provincial Russian town. A place that seems, incredibly quiet and boring on the surface.
Yeah, and instead of one hero, we're tracking at least 6 major characters. Every single one of them represents a different clashing philosophy.
It's like dropping 6 highly reactive, unstable chemicals into a single beaker, sealing the lid, and just watching the pressure build.
I love that analogy. Okay, let's unpack this from the beginning, because the genius of Dostoevsky is that he doesn't start with the bloody murder or the bomb-throwing radicals.
No, he forces us to look at the people who raised them.
Exactly. We have to look at the origins of the ideological crisis, which means transitioning from the terrifying revolutionaries to, well, a guy sitting in a living room drinking imported tea and complaining about his nerves.
That is such a great way to put it. We have to look at the old generation, embodied by the character of Stepan Verkhovensky.
So tell us about Stepan.
Stepan Verkhovensky is really the seed of the demons. He's an aging, vain, liberal intellectual from the 1840s.
And what does that mean in this context, the 1840s versus the 1860s?
To understand that specific archetype, since the novel takes place in the late 1860s, you have to understand that the men of the 40s were this highly romanticized, European-facing intelligentsia.
So they were looking west.
Yes. They were totally obsessed with French literature, German idealism, and this sort of vague, poetic humanism. Stepan speaks French constantly, he cries easily, he quotes poetry, and he writes very long, very dramatic letters.
And he lives this incredibly insulated, luxurious life. I mean, he's spent the last 20 years living off the wealth of this domineering, incredibly rich widow named Varvara Petrovna.
Right, he has it made.
Supposedly he was hired as a tutor to her son, but in reality he is basically a piece of intellectual furniture in her mansion.
She keeps him around to show off to her high society friends, like a pet intellectual.
Yeah, and he plays this role of a persecuted romantic exile. He actually convinces himself that the government is constantly monitoring his every move because his ideas are just so dangerous and revolutionary.
Which is absurd, of course. He requires the label of victim to feel important. It's entirely a performance.
Completely. He loves to sit in Varvara's drawing room and hold court, speaking so eloquently about freedom, humanity, the rights of the peasants, and the beauty of art.
But it's purely theoretical. It's salon-style liberalism. His ideas are entirely aesthetic. They have no teeth, no real-world application, and absolutely no moral anchor.
I want to focus on that phrase, no moral anchor, because it feels incredibly relevant. Like, imagine Stepan as a man who sits inside a beautifully furnished, very flammable wooden house, right?
Okay, I like where this is going.
And he writes this glamorous, highly theoretical essay about the raw, untamed beauty of fire. He talks about how fire clears the old brush, how it's the ultimate expression of chemical freedom, how the flames dance in perfect, unrestricted autonomy.
Right, romanticizing the destruction.
Exactly. He publishes it, all his friends applauds, they drink champagne and toast to the concept of fire. And then, a decade later, he is completely and utterly horrified when his son actually brings a can of gasoline and a match and burns the house to the ground.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. He loved the concept of the fire, but he never actually wanted to smell the smoke.
Exactly. But wait, let's look at the mechanics of that blame for a second. Stepan is pathetic, sure. He's vain. He cries over minor slights. He writes unsent letters. But isn't he physically harmless?
Physically, yes. He wouldn't hurt a fly.
So why does Dostoevsky place so much foundational guilt for the bloody destruction of the town on a guy who just likes to hear himself talk in a parlor? Shouldn't the blame rest solely on the people pulling the triggers and throwing the bodies in the pond?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Dostoevsky is making a profound argument about the trajectory of ideas. The cynical, violent, bloodthirsty generation of the 1860s didn't just materialize out of a vacuum.
They came from somewhere.
Right. They were the logical, inevitable conclusion of the previous generation's hollow intellectual vanity. When you teach the next generation that nothing is sacred, that all morality is just a matter of perspective, you dismantle the spiritual immune system of the culture.
So they have no defense mechanism.
Exactly. Stepan just wanted to use that relativism to feel sophisticated and progressive. But the youth, they took him at his word. He left them completely defenseless against the virus of radical nihilism.
Because if nothing is objectively true, then power and destruction become the only tangible realities.
Precisely.
So by making ideas a playground, he essentially paved the way for the slaughterhouse. He hollowed out the foundation and was shocked when the building collapsed. That is a terrifying thought.
It really is the core warning of the book.
And that transition from the harmless aesthetic vanity of old Stepan to the devastating practical emptiness of his students, it brings us to the darkest, most magnetically disturbing puzzle in the entire book. We really have to talk about Nikolai Stavrogin.
Yes. Nikolai Stavrogin is Varvara Petrovna's son. He was directly tutored by old Stepan as a child.
So he's the product of that exact philosophy.
Literally. If Stepan is the man who played with the idea of the void from a safe distance, Stavrogin is the man who actually stepped completely inside it.
He is such a bizarre character. I mean, everyone in the novel is entirely obsessed with him.
They can't look away.
Right. He's incredibly handsome, aristocratic, and possesses this immense physical strength, but he exudes a cold, dark, suffocating gravity. Like whenever he enters a room, the air just gets heavier.
Yes, the radical socialists, the conservative reactionaries, the deeply religious characters, the socialite women, they are all inexplicably drawn to him. They project their own desperate hopes and extreme ideologies onto him.
The sources describe him as the center of a very twisted solar system. All the other characters orbit him, pulling on his gravity.
But to understand why they orbit him, we have to look at Stavrogin's internal state, or rather his complete lack of one. He is fundamentally hollow. Exactly. He has experienced everything life has to offer. He's had unlimited wealth. He has traveled the globe. He has engaged in extreme debauchery. He's fought in military combat. He's debated the greatest minds. And he has arrived at a state of absolute paralyzing apathy.
He genuinely believes in nothing. He literally cannot distinguish between good and evil.
Because of the total relativism he was raised with, he feels that good and evil are mere social illusions. He explicitly states that to him, a noble act of profound self-sacrifice and a heinous act of sadistic brutality hold the exact same moral weight.
Which is absolute zero.
Absolute zero.
And he puts this to the test in ways that are just deeply disturbing. We have to address the suppressed chapter, which is a really crucial piece of the lore surrounding this novel.
It is. It's infamous.
Yeah. When Dostoevsky submitted the manuscript, his publisher refused to print one specific chapter because it was simply too dark and transgressive. It was censored for decades, usually known as At Tikhon's or Stavrogin's Confession.
And in this chapter, Stavrogin visits a monk named Tikhon and hands him a written confession of his worst crime.
And it's awful.
It is. While living in St. Petersburg, driven by sheer boredom and this desperate desire to see if he could still feel anything, any ping of conscience, any warmth of humanity, any terror of damnation, he sexually assaulted a young, impoverished girl named Matryoshka.
And his reaction afterward is just unthinkable.
Afterward, he sat in an adjoining room, drinking tea in complete chilling silence while he waited for her to hang herself. And he just watched a tiny red spider on a geranium leaf while the time passed.
The horror of that scene isn't just the unspeakable act itself, but his reaction to it. I mean, he doesn't feel agonizing, tear-drenched remorse. He doesn't feel the crushing weight of guilt.
No, he just feels a cold, clinical curiosity about his own lack of feeling. The tea, the spider, the suicide, it all registers as completely emotionally flat.
That is the philosophical dead end of relativism. When you truly, deeply internalize the belief that no action has intrinsic moral value, you lose your humanity entirely.
You become a ghost, haunting your own life. Stavrogin is suffering from a terminal case of existential boredom.
Let's follow that thought, though, because it raises a massive contradiction for me. If he's so empty, if he's paralyzed by his own apathy, why is he the center of this whole revolutionary movement?
That's the big question.
Yeah. How does a man who believes in literally nothing become a messianic, prophetic figure for so many passionate, driven people?
Well, this is where Dostoevsky's psychological insight is just piercing.
Yeah.
Absolute apathy is incredibly mesmerizing to anxious, searching people.
Really? How so?
Think about the dynamics of a crowded room where everyone is frenzied, stressed, arguing about politics, and desperately trying to figure out the meaning of life.
Okay, a typical dinner party.
Right. Now, if one person stands in the corner, perfectly calm, perfectly detached, indifferent to the debate, indifferent to life and death, people assume that person possesses a secret.
Oh, I see.
They assume the detachment is evidence of a higher truth that they just aren't privy to.
People project wisdom onto the blank slate. Because he isn't trying to convince anyone of anything, they assume he must be above the need to convince. His silence looks like profound depth.
And Stavrogin actively used this dynamic. Before the main action of the novel, during his travels, he essentially conducted philosophical experiments on vulnerable people, like a chemist playing with volatile elements in a lab.
Just to see what would happen.
Exactly. He would find a searching mind, and he would plant an extreme, absolute ideology in it just to see what the host would do with the infection. To one man, he preached radical, militant atheism and the absolute necessity of destroying the state.
And to another.
To another, he preached pure, absolute devotion to the Russian Orthodox God and the divine messianic destiny of the Russian peasantry.
He was just planting viruses. He infected them and walked away, completely untouched by the ideas himself, leaving these men to be consumed by the flames he casually lit.
He's the theoretical void.
But a void eventually needs a mechanism to cause real destruction. We have to pivot from Stavrogin's theoretical apathy to the man who turns that void into a weapon. We have to look at Pyotr Verkhovensky.
Yes, Pyotr is the practical application of the void.
Pyotr Verkhovensky is old Stepan's estranged son. He was raised entirely devoid of affection, right?
Entirely. He was abandoned by his father, shipped off to boarding schools, and left without any moral or emotional guidance whatsoever.
And Pyotr is Dostoevsky's direct fictionalization of Sergei Nikolaev, the real-life murderer we discussed earlier.
He is. And Pyotr represents a completely new mutation of evil in this ecosystem.
How is he different from the others?
Well, the old generation, people like his father Stepan, were vain and foolish, but they still felt things. Stavrogin is empty, but he is tormented by his emptiness. He's at least aware of his own tragic condition.
But Pyotr?
Pyotr's just a machine. He isn't angry. He isn't deeply passionate about the plight of the working class or the struggle of the proletariat. He's a calculating, hyperactive, constantly smiling manipulator.
The sources describe him as the engine of the plot. He never stops moving. He flits around the town, dropping hints, spreading malicious rumors, flattering the governor's wife, manipulating the local elite, and eating constantly.
And the terrifying truth about Pyotr is that he doesn't even care about the socialist ideals he is supposedly fighting for. He explicitly admits he's a scoundrel, not a socialist.
He doesn't want equality. He just wants power.
Exactly. He uses ideology solely as a crowbar to pry society apart.
The way he damages his secret revolutionary cell is where we see his true genius for depravity. He has this group of 5 local men, his quintet.
And he needs to bind them together tightly.
Right, so they will obey his orders without question when it is time to start the revolution.
Because he understands a fundamental truth about human psychology and group dynamics. Sharing a political pamphlet isn't enough to bind people permanently.
Ideas are cheap.
Very cheap. And human beings change their minds about ideas all the time. If you want unbreakable, permanent loyalty, you need something much stronger, much darker than an idea. You need the tactic of shared guilt. You need blood.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about how extreme criminal organizations or modern cults operate. If you are running a syndicate, how do you guarantee that your lieutenants will never go to the police?
You make the initiation process require a crime.
Exactly. You force them to do something so horrific, so deeply illegal, that nobody can ever leave the circle clean. If everyone's hands are covered in blood, nobody can testify against the others.
And that's exactly what Pyotr orchestrates. A murder purely for this psychological mechanism.
He convinces his cell of 5 men that one of their former associates is a police spy.
With no real proof, by the way. He just manufactures the paranoia flawlessly. He forces the members of his cell to participate in the assassination of this man, binding them in a pact of mutual, inescapable guilt.
It is the ultimate application of the Nietzschean philosophy. The murder serves no practical strategic purpose for the revolution. It is simply team building through trauma.
Team building through trauma. It's a horrifyingly effective mechanism.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it brings us to the victim of this machination. We need to look at the people whose lives are destroyed by these philosophical games. We have to discuss Ivan Shatov.
Yes, Shatov is the ideological casualty of Stavrogin's experiments.
Remember how we established that Stavrogin planted extreme ideas in people's heads just to see how they would react?
Shatov was one of his prime subjects.
He's a deeply heartbreaking character. He's a former radical, a former member of the socialist circles, but he has desperately swung in the exact opposite direction.
Because years ago, Stavrogin convinced Shatov that the only salvation for Russia, the only truth in the universe, was to be found in the Russian people and in the Orthodox God.
And Stavrogin didn't believe a word of it himself.
Not a single word. But Shatov swallowed the philosophy whole.
Shatov represents the agonizing, desperate search for truth in a world completely saturated with lies. He violently wants to believe in God, but his rational, modern mind struggles to make the leap of faith.
There is an incredibly famous dialogue in the book where Stavrogin confronts Shatov and asks him point blank, "Do you yourself believe in God or not?"
And Shatov stammers out, "I believe in Russia. I believe in her orthodoxy. I will believe in God."
I will believe in God.
Huh.
It is a profound admission of his internal agony. He doesn't have the faith naturally, but he's trying to will it into existence through sheer psychological force.
He is trying to build a solid, enduring house on a foundation he knows he constructed out of thin air. He is intellectually clinging to an idea of God because he sees the horror of the alternative.
And his honesty, his desperate search for a moral path, makes him incredibly dangerous to Pyotr's cell. He has openly rejected their nihilism, he has rejected their violence, and he wants out.
That makes him an ideological traitor.
Exactly. He's the one Pyotr decides to frame as a spy and murder to bind the group.
And Dostoevsky orchestrates Shatov's narrative arc with the most devastating tragic contrast imaginable.
He really does. Just before he is targeted by the cell, Shatov experiences what is arguably the only moment of pure, unadulterated grace in the entire novel.
His estranged wife, Marie, suddenly returns to the town. They haven't seen each other in years. Their marriage was a disaster, and she arrives extremely ill and heavily pregnant with another man's child.
And it is heavily implied that the child is actually Stavrogin's.
Right. A lesser writer would have used this to push Shatov further into despair or rage. But Shatov, this gruff, tormented, socially awkward man, doesn't react with anger or jealousy. He is entirely overjoyed.
He runs frantically around town in the middle of the night, pawning his few miserable belongings just to hire a midwife.
He helps deliver the baby. And when he holds this newborn child, he experiences a profound spiritual awakening. He sees the absolute, undeniable miracle of new life.
He feels genuine human connection, deep compassion, and overwhelming forgiveness. In that messy biological moment, he feels the presence of the God that he had been fruitlessly searching for through abstract philosophy.
It is a moment of pure, messy, beautiful human existence. Shatov completely transcends ideology. He doesn't care about the revolution anymore. He doesn't care about abstract theology. He doesn't even care that it isn't his biological child.
He just loves the life in front of him. He finds the anchor.
And then, the very next night, Pyotr's cell lures him to a dark, isolated grotto in the park, and they brutally murder him. They shoot him in the head and throw his body into the pond.
It's just gut-wrenching. Dostoevsky intentionally places the miracle of birth directly adjacent to the horror of ideological murder. It is the ultimate philosophical contrast.
The warmth, unpredictability, and grace of a newborn child versus the sterile, cold, murderous logic of abstract ideology.
The radicals murder a man who has just discovered how to truly live. It demonstrates that their concept of revolution is inherently anti-life. It cannot tolerate the messy reality of human love.
Shatov is murdered for an ideology, but the exploration of destruction doesn't stop there. Dostoevsky pushes the boundaries of ideological possession even further.
Oh, much further.
We have to look at a character who chooses to kill himself for an ideology. We have to unpack Alexei Kirillov, the philosophical suicide.
Kirillov is one of the most conceptually dense and fascinating characters in all of literature. He is a structural engineer by trade.
And he lives a very simple life, right?
Very Spartan, ascetic even. He drinks tea, he does gymnastics to maintain his health, he plays with children, and he is generally very kind. But his mind is completely consumed by a single, terrifying idea.
Suicide as the ultimate act of free will.
Yes. Kirillov is another one of Stavrogin's experiments. Stavrogin infected him with the idea of the man-god. We really need to slow down and dissect this concept because it requires following Kirillov's specific, relentless internal logic.
Okay, let's walk through his logic. Where does he start?
Kirillov's argument begins with an anthropological premise. He argues that all of human history is defined by two things: the fear of pain and the fear of the afterlife.
So because humanity is terrified of death and the unknown, we invented God.
Exactly. God is essentially the psychological projection of humanity's fear of death.
And if God exists, then everything is God's will. Humans are merely subjects, slaves to a higher, incomprehensible power. We have no true autonomy.
But Kirillov reasons, if God does not exist, which he firmly believes is the case, then the position of the ultimate creator, the highest will in the universe, is completely vacant.
So if there is no God, then man must become God. Man must step into that cosmic vacancy.
Right. And becoming a god in Kirillov's mind isn't about acquiring supernatural powers or shooting lightning from your hands. It is about achieving absolute terrifying freedom. It is about possessing a will that is subordinate to absolutely nothing.
And how does suicide prove that?
For Kirillov, the only way to prove definitively that you are the absolute master of your own existence, that you have conquered the ultimate human fear, is to kill yourself.
Not out of despair or sadness.
No, not to escape a mounting debt or a broken heart. Those are all circumstantial suicides dictated by external pressures. You must kill yourself purely in cold blood, in a state of perfect calm, solely to assert your independence. You kill yourself simply to prove that you can.
It is the ultimate existential flex. He says, I will kill myself to prove my insubordination and my new terrible freedom. It's a mathematical proof to him.
He believes that if he can demonstrate that a human being can overcome the fear of death without relying on the concept of God, he will fundamentally alter human history. He thinks his suicide will be a turning point, physically transforming humanity into a race of man-gods who will live in a state of continuous earthly perfection because they are no longer enslaved by fear.
But let's take a step back and look at the glaring absurdity of this. Isn't this just a massive contradiction? He's trying to achieve ultimate freedom. He wants to become a god. But his freedom just leaves him as a bleeding corpse on the floor. How is that a victory? He doesn't get to enjoy his freedom. He is dead. The logic eats itself.
That paradox is exactly the dark irony Dostoevsky is exposing. Kirillov's philosophy is perfectly internally consistent in his own mind, but it is entirely sterile and useless in reality.
A philosophy that requires the destruction of the philosopher is a sickness.
And Dostoevsky exposes this contradiction not just through theoretical debate, but through the brutal mechanics of the plot itself.
Because Pyotr Verkhovensky gets involved.
Of course he does. Pyotr knows all about Kirillov's grand plan to kill himself for philosophical reasons, and Pyotr desperately needs the fall guy for Shatov's murder.
So he uses Kirillov's ideology against him.
He visits Kirillov and presents a very cynical, practical argument. He says, look, you are going to kill yourself anyway to prove your grand point about freedom. Before you pull the trigger, just sign this piece of paper taking responsibility for Shatov's death. What does it matter to you? You'll be dead. You're above human morality anyway. A true man-god wouldn't care about a piece of paper.
It is the ultimate manipulation of a pure intellectual by a ruthless pragmatist, and it works.
It does. The tragic, pathetic reality of Kirillov is that his supposedly pure, noble, godlike act of philosophical suicide is entirely hijacked. Pyotr manipulates him into signing a fake confession right before the end.
The purest philosophical act in the novel is used as a cheap alibi to cover up a dirty, sordid, cowardly crime. Kirillov thinks he is saving humanity, but in reality, he is just providing administrative cover for a sociopath.
It perfectly illustrates that you cannot have a pure philosophy in a vacuum. The real world, the dirty, manipulative real world populated by people like Pyotr, will always co-opt abstract ideas for its own destructive ends.
Kirillov's intellect was completely detached from reality, and it led directly to his own meaningless, manipulated destruction. And that idea intellect entirely disconnected from human reality scales up in the most terrifying way imaginable.
We move from the individual to the entire society.
Right, from the self-destruction of an individual to the blueprint for the destruction of entire societies. We have to look at Shigalyov, the theoretician of Pyotr's radical group.
Shigalyov is the man who has sat down and mathematically mapped out the perfect future society. He presents his findings to the secret cell.
Before we dive into Shigalyov's political system, I want to be incredibly clear with you, the listener. As we discuss this blueprint, we are imparting this information strictly as an analysis of Dostoevsky's text. We are not taking a political side, nor are we endorsing or condemning any modern political movements, left or right. Our sole goal is to explain Dostoevsky's philosophical critique as it exists in the novel published in 1872.
Absolutely. Our focus is entirely on the text and its historical context. So, in the text, Shigalyov stands up at a secret meeting holding a massive, dense notebook, and he makes one of the most chilling, paradoxical admissions in the history of political literature.
What does he say?
He says, I am perplexed by my own data, and my conclusion is a direct contradiction of the original idea with which I start. Starting from unlimited freedom, I arrive at unlimited despotism.
Starting from unlimited freedom, I arrive at unlimited despotism. The logic behind that leap is absolutely vital to understand. How does a desire for total freedom logically compute into total tyranny?
Well, Shigalyov has realized a dark, uncomfortable truth about radical utopianism. If your starting premise is that you must make everyone perfectly free and perfectly equal, you immediately run into a biological and sociological wall.
Because people aren't naturally the same.
Right. Human beings are inherently unequal in talent, in ambition, in intelligence, in physical strength, and in desires. If you let people be entirely free, they will naturally, inevitably create hierarchies. The smart will outmaneuver the slow. The ambitious will acquire more than the lazy.
Therefore, the only possible way to maintain absolute forced equality is through absolute unyielding control. Freedom and equality, pushed to their absolute extremes, are actually at war with each other in his system. To guarantee the equal outcome, you must completely eliminate the freedom.
And Shigalyov's mathematical solution to this problem is brutal. He proposes dividing mankind into two unequal parts. 1/10 of the population will be granted absolute liberty and unbounded dictatorial power over the remaining 9/10.
And the 9/10?
The 9/10 must give up all individuality, all ambition, and become a uniform herd. Through absolute submission and the loss of personal identity, they will achieve a kind of primitive, enforced innocence. They will be equal, but only because they have been reduced to livestock.
Pyotr is absolutely thrilled by this idea, isn't he?
Oh, he loves it. He takes Shigalyov's dry mathematics and injects his own chaotic energy into it. Pyotr expands on the blueprint, arguing that to achieve this herd state, they need to actively reduce the level of education, science, and talent in the society.
He famously declares, Cicero will have his tongue cut out, Copernicus will have his eyes put out, Shakespeare will be stoned. Because high intelligence and great art naturally create inequality. Exceptionalism is a threat to the uniform herd.
It is the systemic, deliberate eradication of human excellence to achieve a flat, easily controlled baseline. And this is where Dostoevsky transitions from a brilliant psychological novelist to a terrifying historical prophet. Remember, he is writing this in the early 1870s.
He is predicting, with eerie, laser-like accuracy, the ideological architecture of the 20th century totalitarian regimes that were decades away.
The sources explicitly highlight this connection. The novel anticipates the terror of the Soviet Union under Stalin, the cultural destruction under Mao, or the intellectual purges of the Khmer Rouge.
It was so accurate, in fact, that Joseph Stalin actually banned demons in the Soviet Union. It was not allowed to be freely published, studied, or discussed for 60 years because it was simply too perfect a mirror of his own regime.
The authorities recognized their own tactics in Pyotr and their own justifications in Shigalov, and they couldn't allow the populace to read the playbook.
Dostoevsky saw that if you remove the transcendent value of the human soul, if people are viewed merely as material units to be organized rather than divine sparks to be respected, then a system like Shigalyov's isn't just a possibility. It is a mathematical inevitability. The system demands the crushing of the individual to sustain itself.
It is the ultimate, horrific endpoint of the relativistic ideas born in old Stepan's cozy, comfortable drawing room.
And Dostoevsky doesn't just leave it as a theoretical discussion in a notebook. He brings the destruction to life. He burns the town down. We transition from the theoretical frameworks to the explosive realization of these ideas in the physical world. The climax of the novel is an inferno.
Structurally, the climax begins with a grand literary festival, a fete, organized by Julia von Lemke, the very naive, incredibly ambitious wife of the local governor.
She fancies herself a patron of the new progressive youth.
She believes she can tame Pyotr's radicals by giving them a platform, by incorporating them into high society. She wants to throw a party to celebrate how forward-thinking and sophisticated they all are.
It is the ultimate display of establishment hubris. The festival is meant to be a grand affirmation of the civilized social order, a display of high culture, but Pyotr and his network have thoroughly infiltrated every level of it, and it devolves into absolute humiliating chaos.
The respected old guard speakers are shouted down by the crowd. A radical grabs the microphone and starts screaming obscenities and revolutionary slogans. The upper-class patrons are openly insulted.
It isn't just a badly managed event, it symbolizes the complete, irreversible collapse of the old societal order. The authorities are entirely paralyzed. They have no idea how to handle a mob that fundamentally does not respect their basic rules of decorum or their presumed authority.
And while the town's elite are distracted, paralyzed by the collapse of their festival, the metaphorical fire of radical ideas becomes a literal raging fire. A massive blaze breaks out in the poor section of the town across the river.
Pyotr's associates deliberately use the chaos and the panic of the fire to cover their tracks for a much darker crime.
During the fire, a marginalized, deeply tragic pair of characters are brutally murdered. Captain Lebyadkin, a drunken, boorish, extortionist soldier, and his sister, Maria Lebyadkina.
Maria is such a crucial, strange character. She is physically crippled, mentally fragile, and lives in a state of delusion. But she possesses a strange, almost holy innocence, a connection to the earth and to a deeper folk spirituality.
And shockingly to everyone in the town, she is legally married to Nikolai Stavrogin.
Which is insane. Why did he marry her?
He married her years ago in St. Petersburg on a drunken bet, as the ultimate act of self-degradation, an intentional mockery of social norms and his own aristocratic standing.
And now, years later, her existence is an extreme inconvenience to Stavrogin's social standing and Pyotr's plans.
Pyotr subtly hints to an escaped local convict that it would be very beneficial if the Lebyatkins were to simply disappear. He doesn't explicitly order it, but he sets the mechanism in motion. And during the chaos of the fire, the convict slaughters them both.
The town is left in absolute ruins. The social order is shattered. Buildings are reduced to smoking ash. The authorities are disgraced. and the demons, our main cast of characters, meet their fates amidst the wreckage.
We already detailed how Shatov is murdered by the cell, and how Kirillov shoots himself to provide the fake confession. But what about the architects of the chaos?
Right, what happens to Pyotr and Stavrogin?
This is where Dostoevsky's realism is particularly brutal. Pyotr Verkhovensky, the practical engine of evil, the man who organized the murders, manipulated the suicides, and stoked the fire, slips away completely unnoticed.
He just leaves.
He gets on a train to St. Petersburg, eating a comfortable meal in first class, entirely escaping justice. He leaves his foolish, traumatized followers behind to be arrested and interrogated by the police.
Let's examine that because it feels so deeply unsatisfying. Why does Pyotr, the absolute worst of them all, the sociopath pulling all the strings, get away scot-free? It defies the standard moral arc of a novel.
What's fascinating here is that Dostoevsky isn't interested in a neat, comforting Hollywood ending where the villain goes to jail and order is restored. Pyotr surviving is Dostoevsky's dire warning that practical, manipulative, psychopathic evil is highly adaptable.
Men like Pyotr survive the collapses they engineer.
Exactly. The operators who use ideology purely for power, who don't actually believe in the cause they move on to the next town, the next social movement, the next revolution. The virus escapes the lab to infect a new host.
The infection is out in the world. It is a chillingly realistic outcome. But what about Stavrogin, the dark center of gravity, the man who planted all the initial seeds?
Stavrogin's fate is different and deeply, quietly philosophical. After the fire, after the murders, after everything has collapsed, Stavrogin finally realizes that he cannot endure his own emptiness any longer.
He just hits a wall.
He cannot find a reason to live, nor a reason to care about anything. He retreats to his family's country estate, and there, quietly, without any grand philosophical statement, without the fanfare of Kirillov's ideological suicide, he hangs himself with a heavily soaped silk cord in a squalid little shed.
And he leaves a very brief note.
The note simply says, "No one is to blame. I did it myself."
No one is to blame. It is the ultimate pathetic statement of nothingness. He doesn't blame society. He doesn't blame God. He doesn't blame his upbringing. He doesn't even blame himself in a meaningful, repentant way. He just ends it.
His elegant, aristocratic, fascinating void ends dangling from a rope in a dirty shed. Stavrogin's death is the final proof that a life without meaning, without moral grounding, without love or faith, ultimately collapses under its own weight.
You cannot survive indefinitely on apathy. The void eventually consumes itself.
It does.
It is a devastating sequence of events. The town is destroyed, the youth are dead, imprisoned, or insane. The charismatic leader is hanging in a shed, and the sociopath is on a train looking for his next victims. How do we make sense of all this wreckage? To find the ultimate meaning, we have to return to the title of the novel itself, and the epigraph Dostoevsky chose.
We have to look at the biblical metaphor.
Demons. Dostoevsky frames the entire massive narrative around a very specific biblical story from the Gospel of Luke, the story of the Gadarene swine.
Let's break down the metaphor and map it to the novel. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus arrives in the country of the Gadarenes and encounters a man who is completely possessed by demons.
The man is naked, living in the tombs, howling, and is a violent danger to himself and his community.
Jesus commands the demons to come out of the man. The demons, speaking through the man, beg Jesus not to send them into the abyss, but to let them enter a nearby herd of swine, a herd of pigs feeding on the mountain.
Jesus agrees. The demons leave the man and enter the pigs, and the entire herd immediately goes mad, rushes down a steep cliff into the lake, and drowns.
And afterward, the townspeople come out and find the man who had been possessed. He is now sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed, calm, and in his right mind. He is entirely healed.
Mapping this to Dostoevsky's Russia is crucial for understanding his final message. The sick man, the possessed man thrashing in the tombs, is Russia itself. Or, extrapolated to our deep dive, it is human society.
Yes, society is the sick man. The demons that possess him are the toxic, unanchored ideologies, the radical nihilism, the extreme materialism, the rejection of objective morality, the obsession with destruction for its own sake.
And the swine, the pigs that run off the cliff.
The swine are the radical revolutionaries. They are Pyotr, Stavrogin, Kirillov, Shigalyov, and the rest of the cell. They are the specific individuals who absorb these toxic ideas, these intellectual demons.
Your ideas possess them, drive them to absolute madness, and cause them to throw themselves over the cliff to their own destruction?
The radicals aren't the demons themselves. They are the unfortunate, infected vessels that get destroyed by the demonic ideas.
But in the biblical story, the sick man is healed after the pigs drown. The infection leaves the host. Does society get healed in the novel?
The profound hope for healing is represented in the final journey of the very man who started it all. We return to old Stepan Verkhovensky.
The man who played with the theoretical fire.
After the town descends into chaos, Stepan finally realizes his own immense complicity. He is horrified by the physical destruction wrought by his son Pyotr and his former student Stavrogin.
He realizes that his generation's vain aesthetic liberalism was the incubator that bred these demons.
Completely broken, he abandons his comfortable life in the mansion. He wanders out into the cold Russian countryside, essentially going on a desperate pilgrimage to find some semblance of real truth.
And the reality of the road breaks him. He falls deathly ill in a peasant village.
He is taken in at a humble peasant hut. And there, he is tended to by a simple woman named Sophia, a gospel woman who travels around selling Bibles. As Stepan is lying on his deathbed, stripped of all his vanity and pretensions, he asks her to read to him. She reads him this exact passage from Luke about the Gadarene swine.
And that is the moment of ultimate clarity for him.
In his final moments, Stepan experiences a profound revelation and genuine repentance. He says to Sophia, "You see, that is exactly like our Russia. These demons that come out of the sick man and enter into the swine, they are all the sores, all the foul contagions, all the impurities that have gathered in our great and beloved sick man in our Russia for centuries."
He finally takes responsibility. He sees that the intellectual vanity of his era was the disease, but he also sees the promise of the ending.
He does. He declares that the swine will drown, the destructive elements will consume themselves, but the sick man will be healed and will sit at the feet of Jesus. In his dying breath, Stepan, the man who spent his entire life performing, theorizing, and avoiding reality, experiences genuine faith and love for the first time.
He realizes that an idea without love is just a weapon.
He dies with a vision of hope, not for the radicals who destroyed themselves, but for the enduring soul of the society that will survive the fever.
It is an incredibly moving, monumental conclusion to such a dark, violent book. It is a profound journey we've taken today. We've seen how Dostoevsky's Demons is far more than a 19th century political thriller. It is a timeless, surgical exploration of what happens when the human intellect becomes entirely disconnected from the human heart and from moral responsibility.
We explored how the aesthetic vanity of Stepan's generation created a moral vacuum. We saw how Stavrogin embodied that vacuum, resulting in a black hole of paralyzing apathy.
We watched Pyotr weaponize that apathy into a cold machinery of violence and shared guilt. We witnessed the tragic casualties in Shatov and Kirillov, men destroyed by their search for meaning. And we explored the terrifying prophecy of Shigalyov, where the demand for absolute freedom inevitably births absolute tyranny.
The final, enduring thought we must take away is that Dostoevsky doesn't abandon us in the wreckage. The death of Stepan suggests that true liberation, true societal progress, doesn't come from tearing everything down, burning the structures, and destroying the past. True liberation comes from finding a meaningful anchor, whether that is profound compassion, an unbreakable moral core, or genuine faith that balances our intellectual freedom with our fundamental human responsibility to one another.
Taking an X-ray of a sick society is a murky, terrifying process. Dostoevsky provides that X-ray, and it clearly shows the deep, structural fractures where morality and connection used to be. And that leaves us with a final lingering question for you to ponder long after you finish listening.
It's an important one.
In our modern age, an age defined by algorithms designed to outrage us, echo chambers that radicalize our beliefs, and a constant, pervasive cultural instinct to tear down traditional structures without knowing what to build in their place, what are the new demons possessing our public discourse?
And perhaps more importantly, who are the modern Stavrogins in our society? Who are the seemingly charismatic, hollow figures standing in the center of the room, completely apathetic, onto whom we are desperately projecting our own search for meaning?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the shadows of Dostoevsky's mind. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember to look for the anchor before you celebrate the fire.